All right, so I guess I'll start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Abhishek Jain, and I'm pleased to invite you all to the fourth episode of the LLM series by Planty. Towards the end of this session, we will also be having a Q&A session for which I would request you all to put your questions in the live chat box. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Anuja Agarwal, a graduate of the 2016 batch of National Law University, Delhi. She then went on to pursue her LLM from Stanford Law School in 2020. She has previously practiced as a legal counsel at Quagmire Consulting and is currently working as a law clerk at the California Department of Justice. In this session, Anuja will be speaking in detail on the application process to Stanford Law School, as well as the opportunities that are available during and after an LLM from Stanford. I would now like to hand it over to Anuja to begin the session.
Thanks, Abhishek. So welcome, everyone. It's a good day outside, so I'm going to wrap it up and then go out soon. But I think I have some tips that I think are very helpful in terms of application to schools, specifically in the US. So we should keep that in mind, that any of the suggestions and tips that I do give are applicable specifically to the US. So we should begin with, let's say, who applies. Now, usually schools in the US have a requirement for some work experience. And if you have, at least 2 years of work ex, then that is really great for you. But having said that, the great thing about schools in the US is that if you can explain to them why your LLM is going to be helpful to you and how your 2 years of work ex, or the lack of 2 years of work ex at the very minimum, is regardless to your aim in completing the LLM, they will value your application. So this is something that is going to be a theme throughout the session. You have to show how your LLM and your profile needs that LLM, and how that LLM will benefit your future goals, and how you might benefit the school in terms of what you can bring to the table as well. So throughout the session, you'll hear me say, don't hold back. So it goes to say that when you're applying for LLM, they expect you to have maybe 2 years of work ex, but if you don't, it's okay. Go ahead and apply anyway, and maybe address it somewhere that while I don't have work ex, I know that further studies in this XYZ specified field will help me in my future career goals. So that is something that should not hold you back. You should definitely apply if you know that the LLM is something that you really want to do. So don't worry, and don't feel like you have to work for 2 years. The next question is when to apply. So of course, each school has their own specific deadlines. So the best place to do would be to go to their websites. But in terms of beginning the application process, and I will talk about how to apply and what is the application process like altogether in this. When you should start applying is I think LSAC, which is the central repository through which you apply to schools in the LLM in the US. It's called LSAC, LSAC. They require you to send your transcripts 4 to 6 weeks before the deadline date, which means you need almost 2 months of a gap before your deadline date. So for example, your deadline date is 1st December. You should have sent in your materials to LSAC by, let's say, October. But then you also have to remember that a lot of schools in India actually cause a lot of delays in giving you transcripts. So really, I would say that if you are wanting to do an LLM, then you need to get on it ASAP. The other reason for that is scholarships. Scholarship applications usually, largely, of course, each scholarship has its own deadline, but a lot of them are actually wrapped up in the summer. So really, the sooner you start thinking about an LLM, the better it is. But again, don't let anything hold you back. Send in your transcripts, see what happens. I personally sent in my transcripts towards the later end of October, and I still managed to get everything done in time. So, don't stress. If you've decided to do something, go ahead and do it. And don't feel like you will not be able to succeed because of small errors like this. It's fine. Just go ahead. The next is the application process itself. So I mentioned LSAC. LSAC is a central repository through which you apply to almost all the law schools in the US. It's very helpful because you only have to fill the form once. What it means is that in October or so, like I mentioned, you send in your transcripts and then you fill out one form. And then when you start applying to each school, they will fill the form for you with all the information that you've already given. They are going to send the transcripts on your behalf. And this also happens with your letter of recommendations. So all your letters of recommendation, they have to be uploaded to LSAC. So then LSAC will be the entity that will forward your letters to the respective schools. And what LSAC does is that it charges you for various services. So for example, the transcript management, it will charge you for each application to each school because they have their own charges as well. So LSAC itself is a little bit confusing, but once you get the hang of it, you realize that it really eases up a lot of your tensions because you don't have to apply to each school separately. You can do it all through LSAC. So in terms of Stanford Law School, which is one thing I wanted to mention is that Harvard specifically does not accept applications purely through LSAC. It has its own application process. You can use LSAC to send your transcripts to them, but they also accept transcripts directly. So with Harvard, there is a little bit of an exception, but almost all the other law schools will be available through LSAC. So I think now I'm going to come to Stanford Law School. There are a lot of really great things about Stanford, of course. But if you're a person who's interested in tech, or interested in working on that coast, Stanford is really going to be the best place for you. It really opens a lot of doors in terms of its brand recognition, in terms of its faculty. You have access to insane resources. In my year at Stanford, I had the benefit of meeting excellent faculty. I had the benefit of meeting speakers and industry professionals who I would have only read about or have heard about, and we've read their texts in school. So it's definitely a platform that gives you access. Some of the other things that also happen, and I think this is more common to law schools across the US, is that they tend to give you other opportunities in terms of exposure as well. So you get, for example, you get to travel a bit through pro bono programs and stuff. So this is something that's very, very exciting when you go to a higher degree program in the US. That's something that's really something that you look forward to. In terms of what happens after, when you go to do a higher degree, what happens? Do you immediately become, good for a great job in the US? What are your positions like? And this is the most common question that I've been asked. The LLM is not a formal requirement for any practice in India or the US. It is simply a good to have. But when you do have it, it is something that definitely shines on your CV. So now you have 3 or 4 different courses of action once you do an LLM. You can continue to practice in the US, you can practice in India, or you can get into academics. If you get into academics, the LLM may not be the best program for you. You might, especially at Stanford, there are other programs like a JSD that helps you set the stage for to do a PhD. So if you're looking at academics, this might not be the right thing for you. But if you're looking to practice law, you could either practice in the US or you could practice in India. This does not guarantee you a job in the US. It does not. In terms of your recognition in the pool of attorneys, you will be lower on the ladder than the other JD students. The JD is the equivalent of the LLB program in the US. So if you are a JD student, you will be given a little bit more recognition than an LLM student, purely because JD students have studied American law for 3 years and LLM students have studied American law for 1 year. So that is what law firms will look at, and they might be preferred over LLM students, even though it's funny because LLM students usually come with work experience. So, you have a fresh JD versus an LLM student who's worked for 3 or 4 years. It's strange, but they still prefer to go with the JD who studied American law. So it does not guarantee you a job at all. But again, if you don't want to come back to India, if your plan is to stick around in the US and look for a job there, if you're determined, you will find something. You will find something. You have to start looking from day one. You have to network like crazy, speak to, again, this is another thing that Stanford gave me, was they gave me a lot of resources on how to network. What does a cold email look like? What does, how do you, in a conference, how do you go up to someone who you don't know, you've never met? How do you go up and how do you speak to them? They teach you all of this. So it's really helpful to have those resources, and networking is super important. It is how you get to know people, otherwise people will not know that you exist. US schools are not very big on promoting LLM students because they have such a big JD class to promote. So, priority wise, LLM students are given a little bit of a backseat. But so then it just becomes up to you, how much you go and push to meet with professors, you meet with speakers who come to speak, you go to speak with other faculty from other schools in your university, for example, the business school or the engineering school. So it's really up to how much work you put in. And if you're dedicated to it, then you will definitely find something. Even with the circumstances with COVID, jobs were very, very, very rare, and they were not available at all. But even then, there were enough positions open that would help you step into, get your foot in the door, and then maybe move on to something that looks like a law firm job in the US. So there's definitely opportunities available, but it's not a given. It really depends on how hard you are working to find that position. Now coming to working in India, coming back and working, it's definitely a shining diamond on your CV. Having an LLM, especially in a specified field of law, will give you a leg up in terms of your competition in India. You will be considered more carefully than you would not have. But I think that's about it. Like I said, it's not a formal requirement anywhere. So having it does not guarantee you any kind of jobs, especially in the US. Common myths. Common myths, yes. That, I don't have very high grades. That's one of the biggest questions that has been asked of me, that, my grades were pretty low. My class rank I was bottom of my class. Apply regardless. Regardless, you must apply. Schools in the US some schools do give a lot of weightage to your rank and your grades, but overall, if you can show them that you are a suitable candidate, they will give you admission, even if you are at the bottom of your class. Um, what does it mean to show that you are a suitable candidate? How do you become a suitable candidate? You need to show them through your own research that you are a good fit for their university. So you look at what that university tends to uphold as a value. For example, at Stanford, they uphold the value of an entrepreneurial spirit, of a technology-related mindset, of, even to an extent, they have a policy related mindset because of the sheer number of policy related working groups that are available at Stanford. So through this research I found that they have these principles that they like to see. So then you alter your application, your statement of purpose, to show how you are a good fit into these, let's say, thought processes. You show that you have an entrepreneurial spirit, and you're going to use that LLM to, let's say, bring a level of integration in society that does not previously exist. You have to show what your plans are with that LLM, and that is what is going to shine in your application. Your grades are not going to be such an important thing, considering that everybody has good grades and everybody applies to the same law schools. So what is it, excuse me, what is it that sets you apart in terms of your application? You have to pick and choose very carefully what are the things that make you suitable for a particular university. In terms of being suitable for a university, you should also, like I said, do your research in terms of what are the programs that each university provides. They are very helpful in terms of once you get in. So, for example, at Stanford, we have 4 different streams of study. I personally studied the stream of law, science, and technology, but you could also go and do environmental law or corporate governance, or just economic policy. But what happens is that while you apply for each individual stream of study, once you're in, you can really take any classes you want. You can study with the JD students. You can even study in other schools like the business school or the engineering school. It is really open for business. You can study whatever you want. You can even study with the undergrads. So if there is a program, if there is a class that you'd like to take which teaches basics, you can even petition for those and take those. So it's really helpful that you're not limited in terms of your study, even though you're applying for one specific field of law. So there are a few important things that you should remember when you're writing your application, not just your SOP, but your entire application. When you start writing your CV, for example, or your letter of recommendation, when you start requesting your letter of recommendation, you should have a little bit of a story in mind about who you are as a person. And like I said, why are you doing this LLM? And use that story to tie your entire application together. For example, you know that you have really good extracurriculars, but really bad grades. So then maybe through your letter of recommendation or through your CV or through your SOP, any one of the components of your application, maybe find a way to sort of explain that, to explain why you don't have such good grades, but actually while you were not studying, you were doing something else which was really amazing. So find your hook and try to tie that in through all the components of your application. So while it may seem a little bit pompous if I say that I did something very great, it might seem very, very flattering if somebody who wrote my letter of recommendation mentioned that same thing. So find the things that you want to say in your SOP and see where each of those things fit. And this also applies to your CV. Your CV is not just a list of your work. Your CV can be drafted in a way to supplement everything that you're not saying in your SOP. It is the best way to talk about, of course, in your work experience, the best way to talk about your clients, specific things that you're proud of doing. For example, simple things like, if in internship you did research on a very hot topic, it's a very good space to talk about that because they're going to read it, but you're also not going to mention it in your SOP. It's not going to be important enough to mention in a letter of recommendation. Where else will you mention it? The SOP, the CV is the best place to do that. Make sure that you bring forth every single thing that you have done, even if you personally think that it's not such a big deal. Just because you think it's not a big deal does not mean that it's not. We tend to minimize our achievements and our um, good things that we've done. We tend to minimize those things a lot. So please do mention everything. You don't know what might strike a chord with the person who's reading your application. So use that CV in a very smart way to mention the small things that you will not have time to mention in your SOP or your letter of recommendation. One important thing to remember is that the major difference between LLMs in Europe and LLMs in the US are that LLMs in the US are very, very, very pricey. So there is something that you must keep in mind while preparing for an LLM and start thinking about how you're going to finance this program. So right in the beginning, I mentioned scholarships. There are various scholarships. There is a Grotius, there's a Fulbright, there's tons, but they all have individual deadlines. They all have individual requirements. Most of them are also very tough. Stanford itself has a program called the Knights Hennessy Scholarship Program. It is very competitive and very, very tough. And its deadline is in September. So, if you're looking for scholarships, you have to get going now. It's January, you have to start researching so that you have time to write and fulfill any of the requirements that they might have. The second thing is, if not scholarships, then loans. Most Indian banks will give loans on a collateral basis. So that's a good thing, but they do require that collateral. In the event that you don't have collateral, then they will give you very small loans, and those small loans are also difficult to get in terms of you have to really show why you need that small loan itself. So this is important to remember because a lot of people do the LLM expecting to earn money after the LLM, especially working in the US, so that they can start paying back that loan or paying back however they've managed to finance it. So you have to keep in mind that it's going to be a cost, and getting a job in the US after that is not guaranteed. So there is a little bit of planning that needs to go in terms of how you're going to pay for a program like that. It is expensive. But again, if you do this on time and you do your research, there are many, many scholarships available and they are not tough to get. One thing I can clarify in advance is that there are federal loans available in the US that loan advisors will suggest to you. But if you are an Indian citizen, you will not be viable for those loans. You can get them with a guarantor if you have somebody in the US who has a green card or is a citizen in the US. But if you don't have those things, then you will not be eligible for those federal loans that are available in the US. So in terms of the cost, it is definitely something that you should keep in mind and plan for well in advance. I think that I just want to close this little bit of a monologue by saying that don't hold back. If you want to apply and you think the LLM is a good idea for you, don't feel like you are not a viable candidate because of any XYZ reason. Apply. Apply because you don't know what they're looking for in terms of what their class looks like. Especially at Stanford, it is an international program. So they build a class with each different type of personality, each different type of person. They want representatives from different countries, from different fields of law, from different personal backgrounds to make that class an interesting class. So don't hold back, write your application, make sure that you show through in that application, show your personality through, show your aims and goals in careers, and your research. Please research your programs, please research faculty, show your research through also in that application, and you will be successful. Definitely.
Thank you so much for that, Anuja. I think you have managed to cover your experience in detail, and you've also explained a lot of things about actually pursuing any degree at Stanford Law School and some of the scholarships that we could avail of and other such opportunities. So thanks for that. We
Okay.
do have a couple of questions. So
Great.
to start off with the Q&A session, the first question that I actually want to ask you is, how important do you really think is work experience in terms of actually getting an LLM in the United States? And also, do you think that it's a very viable option for a student, let's say in their final year, to actually consider trying an LLM straight out of law school?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Abhishek. Like I mentioned, there is a sort of informal requirement, or maybe even close to formal requirement by schools for you to have a little bit of work experience before you apply. But what my suggestion would be is to not hold back your application just because you don't have work. Even if you're straight out of law school, if you think that the LLM is the right next step for you, you should apply. The only thing that will happen is that then you will have to show to them why this is the right next step for you, why you think that doing the LLM at this stage of your life is a good thing for your future career and your long term plans. So yes, you should apply regardless of whatever your career path is, current position in your career path is. But formally, yes, I think they will tell you that we want some work, but they will not hold it against you if you don't have any.
All right, all right. I think that covers my answer. Actually, I do have a follow-up question there. So,
Sure.
do you think that internships in law school can actually qualify as a part of that work experience in any way?
No, they are very clear that they mean post qualification work experience. So, which basically means that once you've graduated and got your degree, after that, if you have any work that counts as work experience.
All right, all right. I think this probably brings me to my last question, and also I think one of the more interesting questions that you often get asked with respect to any degree in terms of higher education. So, how exactly did you go about choosing, let's say, Stanford over the other universities that exist out there for an LLM? And also, can you just elaborate about how did you make the choice between the United States or pursuing it in Europe?
Sure. For example, one of the things that I was very clear about was that I'm an antitrust lawyer and I want to continue doing antitrust law. And my particular field of focus in antitrust law is also tech. That helped me identify and eliminate a lot of schools that I was not interested in going to. When I did identify in my 5 or 6 schools that I was interested in, I then, once I received my, acceptances in, and then I knew what my options were, I also looked at I basically had a pros and cons list of which school has better faculty, which school has a better, for me, for example, an antitrust program, a tech program. You know, it also mattered that what is the access of the school like. For example, with Stanford, I knew that I would have a great access to the tech, sector in the US for the access to Silicon Valley in general. So all of these factors was something that made me feel like Stanford was the right school for me. So similarly, when an applicant has applied and now has acceptances in front of them, or even before they apply, look at who you are, look at what your field of law is, what are the good schools that have good programs in that field of law. Even if you don't really know what your field of law is, for example, if you're a final year student and you haven't really worked, but you have an idea of whether you want to go into litigation or corporate law, there are still some schools that will give you a little bit of difference between those two. So of course, litigation is not the same as Indian litigation. It'll then become something like public interest litigation. So you'll have schools that have really good public interest litigation programs, as opposed to corporate law programs, or maybe like they have great human rights programs. So again, it's really a matter of what your interests are and what schools then match your interests. You have to then eliminate, otherwise there's a lot of schools you can actually apply to.
Yep, I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I think that that level of research will definitely be needed when you're making that kind of an investment into an LLM. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think with that, that winds up the Q&A session too. So thanks a lot, Anuja. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of Team Planty for taking this session. It was very, very useful. And trust me, this is going to help a lot of students who are probably going to consider applying for an LLM at Stanford in the future.
Okay.
So thank you once again.
No problem, Abhishek. Thanks a lot.